A young girl escorted to school by armed soldiers becomes a symbol of a nation's conscience. A single act of refusing to give up a bus seat ignites a movement that shakes the world. What if the greatest struggle for American freedom didn't happen in 1776, but in the streets, churches, and courtrooms nearly 2 centuries later? The American Civil Rights Movement was not a sudden uprising, nor was it the work of a single leader or moment. It was the result of generations of struggle rooted deeply in the history of slavery, segregation, and inequality that followed the end of the Civil War. When slavery was abolished in 1865, freedom on paper did not translate into equality in life. Southern states enacted Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation, stripped Black Americans of voting rights, and maintained a system of economic and social oppression that endured for decades. By the early 20th century, African Americans faced separate schools, separate neighborhoods, and separate public facilities, conditions upheld by violence, intimidation, and discriminatory laws. Lynching and racial terror were used to enforce the racial order, while the legal system often offered little protection. Despite these realities, Black communities built institutions of resistance through churches, schools, newspapers, and advocacy organizations such as the NAACP, founded in 1909 to challenge racial injustice through the courts. The modern civil rights movement gained momentum after World War II. African American soldiers returned from fighting for democracy abroad, unwilling to accept second-class citizenship at home. At the same time, the Cold War placed the United States under global scrutiny, exposing the contradiction between its democratic ideals and its treatment of Black citizens. These forces created a moment where change became increasingly unavoidable. In 1954, the Supreme Court delivered a landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education, declaring that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The ruling overturned decades of legal precedent and struck at the heart of segregation. While it did not immediately dismantle segregation, it provided a powerful legal and moral foundation for the movement that followed. Resistance to integration was fierce. In many Southern states, officials openly defied federal orders. It was in this climate that ordinary citizens became agents of extraordinary change. In 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama, for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. Her arrest sparked the Montgomery Bus Boycott, a year-long protest led by a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott demonstrated the power of nonviolent mass action and propelled King into national prominence. Nonviolence became a defining strategy of the movement, inspired by Christian theology and the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. Protesters believed that exposing injustice through peaceful resistance would awaken the moral conscience of the nation. Sit-ins, boycotts, marches, and freedom rides were organized across the South, often met with arrests, beatings, and intimidation. In 1960, college students launched sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, beginning in Greensboro, North Carolina. These students, many of them teenagers, faced harassment and violence but refused to leave. Their courage inspired similar actions nationwide and led to the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which played a crucial role in grassroots organizing. The movement intensified as activists challenged segregation beyond schools and buses. Freedom riders traveled through the South to test federal rulings banning segregation in interstate travel. They were met with mob violence, firebombings, and arrests, yet their determination forced the federal government to enforce desegregation laws more aggressively. Television transformed the civil rights movement into a national and international event. Images of peaceful protesters attacked by police dogs, beaten with batons, and sprayed with fire hoses shocked viewers around the world. Nowhere was this more evident than in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963. Under the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr., protesters faced brutal repression from local authorities. The images broadcast from Birmingham became a turning point, generating widespread public support for civil rights legislation. That same year, more than 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C., for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was there that King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, articulating a vision of racial equality grounded in the promises of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The march demonstrated the movement's scale, discipline, and moral force. Yet the movement was never unified around a single voice or approach. While King advocated nonviolence and integration, other leaders and organizations emphasized different strategies. Malcolm X challenged the movement to confront racism more directly, arguing for black pride, self-defense, and autonomy. His message resonated with many who felt that nonviolence was insufficient in the face of relentless oppression. As pressure mounted, the federal government began to act. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, outlawing segregation in public places and banning employment discrimination. The following year, after violent attacks on peaceful marchers in Selma, Alabama, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, protecting the right to vote and dismantling many barriers to political participation. These legislative victories marked major achievements, but they did not end inequality. Northern cities faced their own forms of segregation, poverty, and police brutality. Frustration over slow progress and persistent economic injustice fueled urban uprisings in places like Watts, Detroit, and Newark. The movement increasingly grappled with questions of economic justice, housing, and systemic inequality. Martin Luther King Jr. expanded his focus beyond civil rights to address poverty and opposition to the Vietnam War. His evolving message drew criticism and hostility, even as it reflected a broader understanding of justice. In 1968, King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, while supporting striking sanitation workers. His death shocked the nation and marked the end of an era. The civil rights movement did not die with King. Its legacy continued through ongoing struggles for equality, influencing movements for women's rights, disability rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and global human rights campaigns. It reshaped American law, culture, and political life, forcing the nation to confront its deepest contradictions. The movement's success was not inevitable. It required extraordinary courage from ordinary people, students, clergy, workers, and families who risked their lives to demand dignity and justice. Their actions demonstrated that change is possible when moral conviction meets collective action. The American civil rights movement was not simply about laws or speeches. It was about redefining citizenship, expanding democracy, and insisting that the nation live up to its founding ideals. It revealed the power of peaceful protest, the importance of solidarity, and the necessity of confronting injustice directly. Today, the movement stands as one of the most significant chapters in American history. Its victories reshaped the nation, but its unfinished work remains a reminder that equality is not a destination, but an ongoing pursuit. The story of the civil rights movement is ultimately a story of people who refuse to accept the limits imposed upon them, and in doing so, change the course of history. The impact of the civil rights movement continues to shape American society in ways both visible and deeply contested. Laws changed, but attitudes often lagged behind. While segregation was outlawed, patterns of inequality persisted through housing discrimination, unequal education, and economic disparity. The movement revealed that legal victories, though essential, were only one step in a much longer struggle. In the decades that followed, activists carried forward the lessons of the movement in new forms. Court battles challenged discriminatory practices, while community organizations focused on voter registration, education, and economic opportunity. Affirmative action policies emerged as an attempt to address historical disadvantages, sparking debates that continue today about fairness, equality, and the role of government in correcting past injustices. The civil rights movement also transformed American culture. It changed the language of rights and justice, embedding concepts of equality into public discourse. Media, music, literature, and education began to reflect stories that had long been ignored or suppressed. Figures once marginalized were recognized as central to the American narrative, reshaping how history itself was taught and understood. At the same time, backlash emerged. Gains made through legislation and court rulings faced resistance, rollbacks, and reinterpretation. Voting rights protections were challenged, economic gaps widened, and racial tensions resurfaced in new forms. These struggles underscored a central truth revealed by the movement: progress is neither linear nor guaranteed. The civil rights movement also left a global imprint. Activists around the world studied its strategies of nonviolent resistance, drawing inspiration for struggles against colonialism, apartheid, and authoritarian rule. The images and ideas born in the American South echoed far beyond national borders, proving that local acts of courage can spark international change. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the movement lies in its moral clarity. It forced a nation to confront the gap between its ideals and its reality. It demonstrated that democracy requires constant participation, vigilance, and sacrifice. The movement showed that ordinary people, acting together with purpose, could bend institutions toward justice. As new generations confront issues of inequality, discrimination, and civil rights, the movement remains a reference point, not as a finished chapter, but as a living guide. Its history offers both inspiration and warning, inspiration in what collective action can achieve, and warning in how easily gains can be undone if they are taken for granted. The American Civil Rights Movement was never just about one era or one group of people. It was, and remains, a struggle over the meaning of freedom itself. And as long as that question remains open, the movement's story continues, unfinished, urgent, and deeply relevant to the present. In the end, the American Civil Rights Movement stands as one of the most powerful reminders of what democracy demands from its people. It showed that rights written into law mean little without the courage to defend them, and that justice is not handed down, it is claimed through persistence, sacrifice, and collective resolve. The movement did more than dismantle segregation, it transformed the nation's moral landscape. It forced the United States to confront its contradictions and to reckon, however imperfectly, with the promise of equality embedded in its founding ideals. The victories achieved were real and hard-won, carved out by individuals who faced violence, imprisonment, and even death in the pursuit of dignity. Yet the story does not conclude with a sense of final triumph. The movement's greatest lesson is that progress must be protected. Each generation inherits both the freedoms gained and the responsibility to defend and expand them. Equality, once achieved, is not self-sustaining, it requires constant vigilance and engagement. The American Civil Rights Movement endures not only in history books or memorials, but in the ongoing struggle to create a society where justice applies to all. It reminds the world that meaningful change is possible when people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. In that legacy lies its true power, a testament to the idea that democracy grows stronger when ordinary people insist that their voices be heard, and when a nation is willing to confront its past in order to shape a more just future.